So I think now we've just got one more question from Timberwolf D.
Hmm.
It's a bit of a silly question, but I think when it comes to talked about stretching one's imagination. What class is Endgame Voyager?
It's plot class.
Plot armor class.
Yes.
Yeah, it's very interesting. I mean, just the because some of the I haven't watched all of Voyager, and so I think I've watched bits of Endgame.
Mm.
I've watched it all the way through, but like it's not just evolved Federation technology, is it? It's like
Well,
some of alien stuff from the Delta Quadrant as well, isn't it?
It's basically kind of Janeway, however many years into the future. I can't remember exactly how many years. It's probably about. Now my memory's failing because the whole episode starts out with a X anniversary of Voyager's return.
Mm-hmm.
It might have been something's telling me there may be the 10th anniversary of Voyager's return, but then they spend a lot more time in the traveling home in that timeline, so it's probably 30, 40 plus years past the or something like that. It's several decades after the kind of the end of season 7 in Voyager, actually, as it actually turns out. And basically Janeway grabs a bunch of specific Borg fighting tech and pops back down the timeline and gives it all to Voyager. So you get this deployable armor, sort of the ablative armor generator, which turns Voyager into all shiny and chrome. And the transphasic torpedoes. I mean, there's a bunch of sensor, it's like stealth baffling technology as well. But the two main visual things is the armor and the transphasic torpedoes, which at least initially blow through Borg cubes like they're made of wet tissue paper.
Yes, I think the transphasic torpedoes are probably the easiest to explain because as far as I'm aware, or at least in my head canon, these are basically torpedoes that only phase into reality. They're basically, off in their own pocket dimension or whatever, and they phase into reality when they're inside the target, by which point they've bypassed the target's defenses, and then it just detonates and then blows up the target from the inside. Because that would also explain why Voyager used, I think, quite a few transphasic torpedoes on the cubes. It wasn't just one shot done. They had to use several, so they're probably only a little bit more powerful than an actual warhead and a photon torpedo.
Yeah, especially when you consider the chunk that was taken out of the Borg cube initially by the first photon torpedo that the Enterprise D fired.
Yes.
Kind of, yeah, if you imagine a basic, it's probably just a quantum torpedo warhead slapped with a transphasic generator so it can bypass the defenses and explode inside the ship.
Yeah, and I think that makes the most sense for when you're dealing with something as large as a Borg cube, where you basically kind of want to rip it in half from the inside. Because otherwise, if you just try chipping away at it, it can regenerate and it can take absurd amounts of damage on the surface without actually being any less effective.
Yeah, whereas if you get the thing deep into the ship, you can start hitting some of the core components that either there may still only be one of, or if there's multiple of, they're kind of clustered closer to the center of the ship. So with a couple of good strikes, you might still take out enough of them to make it go boom.
Yes, yeah. So I mean, I think the transphasic torpedoes are relatively easy to explain. The armor is, I don't think it's ablative armor, because ablative armor is very specifically established, or the way it makes most sense is that it's a kind of destructive armor that it takes the energy from an impact and then slowly burns it off in a controlled way, and then it's a bit like sort of ERA of its time.
Yeah, I mean they do I think they call it an ablative generator, but that could mean anything. I mean, in some ways, it is the logical extension of transporter and replicator technology if you assume that you can convert... Well, this thing, you can... With a transporter, you can convert matter to energy and back again. So, logically speaking, you should be able to, like, cut that process in half and go, okay, we're going to just use energy to create additional matter. Whereas we know with the replicators, they tend to have a kind of a raw material to work with as a base from a base and reconfigure it. But I suspect, given the number of times we have had, you know, things being generated out of nothing, that it's probably more of an energy efficiency thing. It's like if you have 50 kilograms of undifferentiated matter, it's probably a lot more energy efficient to just reconfigure that into 50 kilos of food than it is to generate 50 kilos of food out of energy. Because, you know, we all know E equals MC squared and all of that, but, you know, and, well, from just atomic weapons as well, you need a fantastic amount of energy to create matter. Because matter is very, very concentrated energy effect, you know, on a grand scale. So yeah, I mean, it's kind of that, I guess it's that logical endpoint of wherever this generator is taking its power from, whether it's a futuristic, maybe the generators have some kind of futuristic capacitor installed, or if it's just like draining massive amounts of energy from the warp core to just generate this solid slab of advanced metals that just go over it.
Yeah, see, if I wanted to balance it, because I think we only really see it when they're using this armor, they're either traveling at sublight or they're in the transwarp corridor. I don't think they actually use it at warp speed, so I do wonder if it does just drain power, like, from everything. And also, that would explain, and also, because they don't, well, it's hard to tell because of the way the armor is designed. I don't think they would be able to fire their phasers. It doesn't look like they should be able to. I don't recall if in the episode...
they just fire transphasic torpedoes after the armor goes up.
Which have their own energy source. So actually that makes a lot of sense that this basically you'd slow down to a crawl, but you'd be carrying your transphasic torpedoes to defend yourself. So, I mean, equally, it could be okay. Have you ever played? This is probably a stupid question. Have you ever played Halo Reach?
No.
Okay, but you're old enough to know of the internet meme of armor lock.
Yes.
Yeah, and so I feel like it's basically the Starship version of armor lock.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, if you think about it, actually, within the episode, that Borg sphere overhauls Voyager. And Voyager's an Intrepid class. It's supposed to be one of the fastest ships in Starfleet. And Borg ships, I mean, okay, they're fast. The Enterprise D could only follow the cube in Best of Both Worlds for so long before it had to drop out of warp. But they're not... The fact that Enterprise D was able to keep up with it would suggest that basically the top speed of a Borg ship and the top speed of a Federation ship should be about the same or within shouting distance of each other, except that the Borg can keep it up for a lot longer than the Federation ship can. But then for Voyager to be overhauled so quickly, either that's one heck of a speedy sphere, or, as you just suggested, the armor is slowing Voyager down.
Yes, and it would also make sense in that it probably... Not that it is probably no good against Alpha Quadrant powers. This armor probably could eat Klingon disruptors or whatever's going on in that timeline. But you probably had no real means of fighting back. Yes, you maybe had transphasic torpedoes, but chances are anti-Borg weapons are so much of a thing that some kind of defense would exist, or indeed other powers had their transphasic torpedoes or something like that.
Yeah, well, I suspect it's probably a case of Maneuvering is still very definitely a thing. We see that in the DS9 battles all the time, that maneuvering helps you throw off enemy target locks. And this makes you slower and much more likely to be hit. So I suspect if you're fighting let's say, a more regular opponent, if you're made slower and less maneuverable by having, several thousand or more metric tons of metal slapped onto you, yes, you're more durable, but you're also much easier to hit. At which point, you haven't really changed much. And as you said, you kind of sacrificed your offensive capability. You'd still be able to fire torpedoes, perhaps, but you've cut down your offensive capability, and you're just going to get hit a lot, which doesn't really help too much. Whereas it makes the perfect kind of counter for the Borg, because for the Borg, as we see in First Contact, one, the Borg are much more likely to hit you in the first place, because First Contact, the ships are dodging left, right, and centre, and pretty much only the Defiant seems to have any luck dodging and actually successfully evading the Borg strikes.
Yes.
And if they do hit you, they're near enough, again, part of the Defiant, near enough one-shot KOs, unless you're a hero ship. At which point, if you're going to be hit anyway, most likely, and that hit's probably going to kill you, making yourself 100% guaranteed to be hit as opposed to 99.99999% guaranteed to be hit, except now the hit won't one-shot you, is a perfectly fine payoff if you are fighting the Borg.
Yes, I mean, it probably does have a very... and also I can imagine that because the Borg are sort of a very collective, single-minded entity, it probably works a lot better on them. Again, I'm just thinking of experiences playing Halo Reach, and there's basically one of two ways that using armor lock will go. And certainly when other people do it, it seems to be, I'll shoot them, they'll go into armor lock, and they'll basically just get their bearings, and then also potentially maybe some of their friends show up, and then they come out of armor lock and they kill me. That's one way that happens. Or the other thing that happens, the opposite is, you find yourself in a spot of bother, you get jumped, you go into armor lock, no one's coming. Oh no, hang on, some of his friends are coming. You pop out of armor lock and you die. So I can imagine that against other alpha quadrant powers or other kind of normal intelligent species, you'd be making that kind of trade-off.
Yeah, and especially if it reduces your offensive power to just torpedo launchers, I would suspect if you were a half sensible general facing a bunch of ships, some of which had these ablative generators, as soon as they go into armor mode, you're just okay, we'll just concentrate fire on the ships that aren't using it. At which point, those ships, which are more vulnerable because they're not engaged their generators, are now basically significantly more outnumbered than they were. Yes. So they all get blown up, whilst your armored ships are now still alive, but have a very limited offensive capability. At which point, the now numerically superior enemy force can just sit there and bombard them till their heart's content until the armor fails. So it'll take a while, but yeah, pretty much the same kind of scenario you described.
Yes, I mean, yes, just because you have the ability to tank hits does not mean that your enemy is going to be so obliging as to just waste their shots on you. If they can't kill you, then they may well go off and find something better to shoot at.
Yeah. Now I can see the ablative generator maybe being a useful last ditch device for Federation ships. Kind of if you're caught out and alone, or you're in a battle and you're about to be destroyed, you're kind of, to use game terms, you're on 10% health. Slapping this thing on, assuming the thing's still working, slapping it on, if you're going to be destroyed very soon anyway, your weapon systems are probably offline, so the lack of firepower probably doesn't really make much odds. But suddenly you become a much harder target to finish off, that might then, buy you the 30 seconds to a minute or so you need to limp out of the battle area, which is the difference between the ship surviving and not.
Yes, so go full turtle mode.
Yeah, basically. But that's probably the main use for it if you're fighting more conventional conflict, or like you said with the armor lock scenario. If you're a Federation patrol ship and you get jumped by 3 or 4 opponents and you just need to survive 15-20 minutes before until the nearest starbase can send out a squadron of friendlies to back you up, then it makes sense. But it's a weapon of the or I guess if you can even call it a weapon, it's a tool of the disadvantaged party. It's not something that someone who's actually trying to win is going to use. It's something that you use to hold out until someone else can come and give you a hand.
Yes. Yeah. And that kind of makes sense potentially if that was partially technology that they were working on specifically for Voyager, because I'm thinking particularly as Pathfinder was helping them in the latter years, slowly helping them get back, and that they were able to, Voyager was able to send some of this technology, and then they were like, oh wait, you can do this with these parts, and stuff like that. I think that would potentially explain kind of why the technology exists, because there's not really any precedent for it in any of the other ships we see, and granted, it's far off in the future of a different timeline.
Yeah, so I think overall, Endgame Voyager as a class, it doesn't really have a class. It's an anti-Borg class. And personally, I would suspect, for all the reasons we discussed, the armor generator is probably not going to see widespread service except as a break glass in case of emergency type thing.
Yes.
The transphasic torpedoes, on the other hand, I strongly suspect that they would probably have been locked away by Starfleet in a very deep vault somewhere and never allowed to see the light of day again, because they are a bit, if you like, game breaking.
Yes. Yeah.
If Starfleet basically suddenly shows up with torpedoes that can bypass all known defenses, that's gonna, in order to maintain parity, or depending on how paranoid the various powers are, in order to get them before they get us, you're gonna have an awful lot of Alpha Quadrant power and Beta Quadrant power suddenly going, oh right, yeah, open the Doomsday Vault.
Yes.
Which is a needless escalation Starfleet doesn't want.
Yes. Yeah, I can see how that would be like a whole Pandora's box of trouble.
Yeah, whereas if you keep them nicely locked away, kind of in case of a rainy day, then when the Borg show up, you're just like, okay, everyone, these are some specialist anti-Borg weapons we've been sitting on for 10 years. Don't ask us where we got them from. Just load them into your launchers, point at Borg, press the red button, and make the Borg go magically away.
Yes, cube delete.
Yeah. At which point everyone will be like, well, everyone will be far too happy the Borg have been blown up to do some deep questioning until you can quietly lock away any that are left over, and B, if the Klingons, the Breen, the Cardassians, or the Romulans come knocking, it's like, where the heck did those come from? With nervous shuffling of feet. Then you just say, oh, well, those are a bunch of experimental weapons that we developed specifically for use on the Borg, and we used them all up, honest. Look, you can look at our ships, there aren't any left. So they're really difficult and really expensive to make, so now the Borg are gone, I guess we won't be making any honest promise kind of pinky swear kind of thing, and hope they go away without unlocking the doom vaults of their own.
Yeah, I like that. So that's all the questions. That's all everyone questions covered. So thanks for that. So I'm just gonna sort of indulge myself very quickly and ask you a quick question.
Sure.
And just as of you mentioned how you got into my Dominion War series, and do you have a particular favorite? Is there one that really stands out to you?
Now there's a difficult question. There's actually probably about half a dozen episodes that all kind of routinely rotate at the top of my favorites. But one of the ones that actually, from both as a Star Trek fan and as a naval historian, that sort of where I think the reason I put this one on top is because there's some episodes that I sit there and I come out and go, that was really fun, you know, just from a general Star Trek fan perspective, like I enjoyed that. But then there's also sometimes there are episodes where I'm kind of sitting there smiling, going, I know exactly what's going to come next. And just waiting to see how it's going to play out. And the hunt for the Houtet probably sits, because I was like, within the first 10 minutes I was like, yeah, this is basically the hunt for the Bismarck but in space. At which point I was just like, one, kudos for actually like researching that and adapting it, and two, since I kind of know how, obviously, like I know how the historic hunt for the Bismarck went, I was like, I know where this is going to end up, but I'm really interested to see on how it gets to that point in this case. Like, what are the differences that have had to be pulled off, and what are the kind of nods to various real life incidents that, like, where's the swordfish crippling the steering parallel go? Like, who's going to do that? And I think that I think I enjoy that one the most because of that kind of it's equal parts knowing what's going to happen and not, which really helps. I think for that's one in general when it comes to sort of fantasy type media. That's one of the best ways of storytelling to get me involved in something. And I mean, that's, I don't know if I've mentioned it, I think we may have talked about it in a previous Q&A, but that's one of the reasons why I actually really like the latest Kingsman movie, the prequel, the World War One set one, because of you kind of lurch between high fantasy and actually tying it into historical events in World War One. And it was that it was that same kind of thing of, oh right, they're delving into this part of actual history. I know exactly how this part of actual history went. Let's see how they do it. And if they do, when it's done well, which like the Hunt for the Houtet was done and the Kingsman film was done, then I'm like, I enjoyed that because it's accurate whilst also being in its own world, kind of thing, as opposed to just completely making things up on a third tangent. So yeah, I definitely enjoyed the Houtet one probably more than anything else.
Wow. Which is impressive, given that was my first Dominion War episode, like proper Dominion War episode.
Yeah, so, I mean, I've picked up various, obviously, various hints and stuff for historically inspired bits and pieces, and also when you covered things that are established alpha canon, even if it's kind of just stuff that's been mentioned in passing, like the Battle of Beta Z. We hear about it in all of 6 lines in one episode, but it's an acknowledged alpha canon thing. So yeah, I think for me it's those kinds of episodes where it's just kind of, whether it's a whole hunt for the Bismarck in space, or it's here's something we heard about in alpha canon, but now here's the full story.
Yeah. I mean, I think also the whole thing of just the idea of is there a critic who says that because you know how a story is going to end, there's no point watching it? I think there's some stupid film critic who said, oh, if something's a prequel, or if you know what's going to happen, there's no point in watching it. And it's like, yeah, no, but my audience would clear example as to why that doesn't. Because yeah, I think everyone knows what's happening with the hunt with the Hootet.
Yeah,
you know,
my entire channel is living proof that that's complete and utter nonsense. Because like any history channel or history documentary or historical film that's vaguely on point in terms of accuracy completely disproves that, because it's just like, yeah, we know who won the First World War, we know who won the Second World War, we know what happened when when Bismarck sailed out, we know what happened to insert any number, like Saving Private Ryan. Did anybody expect that the Allies were going to lose on Omaha Beach? We know these things and what was going to happen. It's like it even comes down to that that whole meme of like people, the fake memes of people being outraged that someone spoiled the fact that the Titanic sinks at the end of the film. There's all these things. We know exactly what's going to happen, but we're very interested in seeing the journey of how we get there.
Yes, I mean one of the most one of the most popular episodes I've done yet is still the Battle of Wolf 359, which is more of like a horror thing rather than a history documentary. And you know how that's going to end. You know what's going to happen. And I think for watching it, when you're watching it, it's like being. It's like that, almost that thing of, well, what I tried to do is, make it feel like you can't look away.
Yeah.
It's you know what's going to happen and you know how brutal it's going to be, but you also kind of, you want to see as well. It's that kind of, I suppose, that inner conflict. So yeah, I mean, I think that's just a great testament, and actually that's made me very proud of what is now, I think, quite an old episode.
Yeah, maybe it's something that, I mean, there's one or two of my own episodes which I've looked back on occasionally and gone, should I get someone who can actually do 3D graphics and revisit that episode? The Battle of Texel has proven to be a relatively popular alternate history for the end of World War One. But for better or worse, the majority of that episode, the actual graphics are basically me with MS Paint, which is not exactly the world's. I'm not exactly the world's most accomplished graphical artist. And I keep thinking, should I get that redone in some kind of 3D with some kind of 3D assets or animation, just to make it look a bit better. The underlying account is solid, but just like maybe the visuals could, because it's popular, like how popular would a remade visual bit be? So I'm just thinking, like, maybe at some point in the future, maybe the Hunt for the Hootet could be revisited with even more and better graphics.
Oh yeah, I mean that's probably one of the better ones to do it, because it's a relatively small scale story. There's not massive fleet battles, whereas like when I get onto it doesn't take long before when I start talking about large fleet actions, where it's about 150 on one side and about 90 on the other side. It's like you couldn't animate that easily.
Yeah. No,
that would be
certainly not without burning out a few computers.
No,
and can you imagine how long you'd spend adjusting models and lighting and all of that? It's like you do a test render, you're like, oh right, like half of the 7th Fleet is in darkness because I forgot to put a spotlight in there. That's
certainly an area which is, I think, someone more experienced than me would have to do that.
Yeah.
So yes, well, just like that. This is a Star Wars tangent, but did you see the X-Wing fan film?
The one set on Coruscant.
Yes.
Yeah, that was good.
And that is like stunning. And I Someone did that on their computer. I don't
Yeah.
know what kind of computer, probably something monstrous, but like still.
The funny thing is, actually, these days producing films like that you can actually do on a reasonably decent gaming PC. It nowadays it comes down a lot more to ability as a 3D modeler and animator rather than physical resources, because back in the day, to get any kind of 3D graphics, you used to have like monstrous walls of machines that would cost tens of thousands, and you'd have to render in a scene over a week to get a 640 by 480 video. And nowadays you could do something like that, like the X-Wing fan film, very quickly if you know what you're doing, actually animating the thing in the first place. So it's now more about the skills rather than the machinery, which is actually quite nice in a lot of ways. But at the same time, the weird thing is, the other reason I like it is that it allows people to hold TV and movie companies to account to a certain degree.
In what way?
When they've clearly been very, very lazy, because there's enough high-end graphical assets, etc., out there that someone with a bit of dedication can turn around and say, actually, no, this is how it should have been done. And then that kind of leaves open the question of, well, if someone with like a £1,500, £2,000 gaming PC and a week or two could do that, then why couldn't they?
Yes,
with months to work, or even weeks to work, and 5-6 figure computer assets and multiple people on the team, etc.
Well, it's like who was it who did the redo of the Picard fleet warp-in scene?
That's exactly what I was thinking.
Yeah, where
it's just like that actually, if we're specifically, especially if we're thinking about the one that's got like the Enterprise, a Sovereign and Galaxy and Intrepids arriving.
Yeah,
it's like that. Not only from an aesthetic point of view and a lore point of view looks a lot better than what they came up with, but actually, like, just the graphical fidelity is better than what they came up with, which kind of makes a lot of the because I know that the creators of the show responded afterwards, and they were like, oh yeah, well, we had to slap this together at the last minute because of COVID with lockdowns and everything. And I'm sitting there going, yeah, but like a couple of guys came up with this from their home on their home PC, so clearly that's not an excuse. Because it's like you could have done that from your PCs as well, except you actually had money and time and probably far more powerful PCs.
Yeah, I mean, the only thing I was going to maybe give them the benefit of the doubt of is maybe all of their, I don't know how it works at these FX companies, maybe all of their machines were kept locked away at the office, and they just had their, domestic, own personal laptops to work on. It's like, yeah, but most companies over that period made arrangements for people to get their setups at home.
Yes, yeah, and to be honest, also remembering how I worked back then, you could. I mean, it varies from place to place. Obviously, this is the UK rather than the US, but I imagine the US restrictions are probably similar. People could go into offices if they absolutely had to.
Yeah,
so it wouldn't have been too difficult to be like, okay, who's our best animator and editor? Right, you can go into the office and play on the machines yourself, and maybe farm out some of the general storyboarding and etc. to people at home. It's still entirely doable. I think it's a mark of how far along 3D graphics have come, because I know you haven't watched it too much of it all, but Babylon 5, when it came out in the sort of parallel to DS9, one of its big selling points at the time was that it was all fully CGI in space. Which was huge at the time. Admittedly, now, especially if you look at the remasters, it's painfully obvious that you're looking at some incredibly low texture.
Oh yeah, old CG.
Yeah, old CG stuff. I mean, the models are still perfectly brilliant. It's just they've got like 320 by 160 texture packs.
Yes,
but one of the more telling things was like when they did the latest tranche of Babylon 5 films a little while back, and this was like maybe 10 years ago. They were mentioning that the original full models, like the ones that were plugged in for the actual render in the original filming of B5, were now the placeholder stuff that they could just basically fling around in testing and kind of in real time, just to test out shots. And then there was this new generation of even higher poly count, even higher res stuff, which is what they were actually using for the new films. I was like, that's a huge step up.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, what I was going to say is like, so, and I'll say it because by the time this comes out, the episode will have come out. In my video, my Wings of Romulus Returning, covering the Nova class battleship from FASA, there was a digital 3D model made, and it was something like 15 years old at this point.
Yeah.
And and that was my main impetus for getting it sort of getting these fellas to remaster it in the Armada modding community, and the remaster is a stunner. And you can see that difference in technology,
Yeah. I've just found the channel in here. It's called Neon Visual.
Yes, that's the one.
Shout out to them, because they've done a bunch. They've actually done a bunch looking at their video listing. They've redone the arrival of the Enterprise, the 1701 in Discovery. They've kind of subbed in an original series version of the Enterprise, and they've done some like that. They've done like a 4K of Voyager's intro sequence. They've done a bunch of really high level stuff, and yeah, the Star Trek Picard one, it's just like, it's because there have been a few kind of Star Trek Picard fixed endings, Starfleet Arrives videos, and so there's a bunch of reasonably good ones, but in a fair few of them, it's fairly obvious that it is. I mean, they're good 3D models, etc. But to be fair to the creators of the show, it is fairly obvious in a lot of them that they are 3D models when you compare it to the fidelity of like the Romulan ships in the accompanying cut. But the Neon Visual guys, if you were watching that, you would be very much forgiven for thinking that was actually what they wanted. That's what could have been in this straight from the studio.
Yes. So yeah, I mean, yeah. If you had edited the episode to just swap that in in place of the original shot, probably no one would be any the wiser.
No, and it's just, and I think this is the thing I like about the modern technology. It allows people to hold studios to account when the studios are lazy, because it's like, look, we can do this better than you for free because we love the show, so therefore, you guys in the studio, you need to do better if you want us to believe that you care about the show as much as we do.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, I mean, and that is the wonderful thing about technology, and I think that's a nice bright
thing
great
to
point
end
to
on.
end
Yeah.
on, yeah. You know, and that's, I think certainly, you know, that was Gene Roddenberry's kind of hope for technology.
Yeah.
So,
all right. Well,
yeah. So, thank you, Drac, for coming on and answering our questions. It's been a lot of fun.
Yeah. And yeah, we'll see everyone later at some point.
Yes, we'll probably think of something else before long.
Right. Bye, everyone.
Yeah.